From university halls to the Vatican, the Shroud of Turin has always sparked discussion and faith. But now, new evidence has come to light that might change everything we know about this enigmatic relic and the man it's believed to portray. Could modern technology help us discover the true origins and authenticity of the shroud? Join us on this exciting journey as the Shroud of Turin unveils a surprising truth about Jesus Christ. Chapter 1. Divine Shroud Secrets. The Shroud of Turin, also known as the Holy Shroud, holds a revered place in the hearts of many, particularly within the Catholic Church. It is believed to be the very cloth that enveloped Jesus after his crucifixion, carrying an image that captivates the imagination. This remarkable piece of fabric spans about 14 feet in length and 3.5 feet in width, crafted through a special weaving technique using flax fibers. Of utmost fascination is the faint yet distinct image imprinted on the cloth, portraying a man facing both front and back, his hands delicately crossed over his lower torso. These mirrored images align along the center of the cloth, each facing in opposite directions, capturing the essence of mystery. The figure depicted possesses a commanding presence with a beard, mustache, and hair cascading down his shoulders, evoking a sense of strength and stature. Notably, the image bears traces of reddish-brown marks that correspond to the wounds described in biblical accounts of Jesus' crucifixion, further deepening the enigma surrounding the shroud. Experts have pondered over the figure's height, estimating it to be between 5 feet 7 inches to 6 feet 2 inches, adding another layer of intrigue to this ancient relic. In 1532, a devastating fire erupted within a chapel in Chambéry, France, where the revered shroud was housed. The intense flames seared the fabric, leaving behind gaping holes and charred edges, casualties of its encounter with molten silver during the inferno's fury. To mend these wounds, skilled nuns of the Poor Clare order meticulously stitched 14 sizable triangular patches along with 8 smaller ones onto the cloth, a labor of love to preserve its sanctity. Then, in the spring of 1898, an Italian photographer by the name of Secondo Pia received a rare opportunity to capture images of the shroud. This historic event marked the first time the relic had been photographed, unveiling an intriguing revelation. The human likeness imprinted on the cloth emerged with startling clarity in the black and white negative, surpassing the visibility in its natural sepia hue. This discovery continues to hold significance, offering invaluable insights into the intricacies of the shroud and its enduring enigma. Subsequently, in 1931, photographer Giuseppe Enri embarked on a similar endeavor, capturing photographic evidence that echoed Pia's findings. Further advancements came in 1978 as ultraviolet photography shed new light on the relic, delving deeper into its mysteries. Displayed in a church in north-central France, the shroud unveiled a negative image infused with three-dimensional details unmatched by conventional paintings. Then, at a crucial moment in 2022, meticulous conservation efforts in Italy uncovered a remarkable revelation. Removing the 16th-century cloth backing revealed a unique stitching pattern on the shroud's reverse, similar to that discovered solely at Masada Fortress in Israel, a connection to antiquity that lends credence to the shroud's narrative, intertwining with the era of Jesus' earthly existence. Delving into the tale woven within the Shroud of Turin, we walk a path laden with intensity, unraveling the touching moments etched into its sacred fibers. Chapter 2. Decoding the Shroud's Mystery. For decades, scientists have been debating how the mysterious image on the shroud could have formed. Some think it was because of radiation, which is like invisible energy that can change things. Alexander Bykov, a Russian scientist, thought maybe it happened when the cloth was quickly exposed to very bright light. Others thought maybe special kinds of radiation like X-rays or ultraviolet rays made the image. They all agree that whatever the radiation was, it came from above the cloth. Paolo Di Lazzaro, an Italian researcher, had some interesting ideas. He believed the radiation, which he thought was ultraviolet light, was even stronger than any ultraviolet light we have today. He said it would have to be really quick bursts of light, way faster than the blink of an eye, and super powerful like billions of watts. Imagine a burst of light so fast and strong it could make an image on cloth that lasts for centuries. Di Lazzaro believes that because we don't have the technology today that can make an image like the one on the shroud, it couldn't have been faked back in medieval times, as some people think. But for those who believe in its sacredness, the explanation is simple. Whatever caused the image, whether it was radiation, ultraviolet light, or something else, came from beyond our world. To Christians everywhere, it's clear that the radiation came from divine light linked to Jesus ascending to heaven. Alberto Carpentieri, a professor at the Turin Polytechnic Institute, has proposed that the image might have been caused by nuclear emissions resulting from a massive earthquake believed to have struck Jerusalem in 33 AD. What adds intrigue to this theory is that the Gospels indeed mention a significant earthquake following the crucifixion of Christ, adding weight to Carpentier's hypothesis. According to Carpentier's study, neutron emissions generated by the earthquake could have been responsible for creating the image on the shroud. These emissions might have also interfered with the levels of radiocarbon, which were subsequently used to date the shroud inaccurately, according to Carpentier. His team of researchers speculates that the earthquake's high-frequency pressure waves generated in the Earth's crust could have triggered nuclear emissions. Carpentier argues that these emitted neutrons might have interacted with nitrogen atoms in the linen cloth, initiating a chemical reaction that resulted in the formation of the face image on the shroud. Moreover, this interaction could have skewed the results of the carbon dating process. Chapter 3. Christ's Passion Etched in Cloth. In the harrowing moments leading to his ultimate sacrifice, Jesus endured a relentless barrage of cruelty and torment, each excruciating detail etched into the very fabric of the shroud that would later bear witness to his ordeal. Stripped of dignity and subjected to merciless beatings, the blows from the flails tipped with both blunt and sharp edges tore into his flesh, leaving it shredded. His body, once whole, became a canvas of agony, battered and covered in the scars of brutality. To compound his suffering, soldiers fashioned a crude crown of thorns, hastily twisted from branches, and pressed it upon his brow. With each thorn, agony bloomed anew, mingling with the warmth of his blood, staining the fabric of his garments. Forced to bear the weight of the cross, his blood-stained garments clinging to his torn flesh, Jesus embarked on a painful journey. Each step forward was a battle against pain and exhaustion, the weight of the cross digging into his shoulders, worsening the wounds inflicted by the merciless scourging. As he stumbled under the burden, the weight of the cross bore down upon him, crushing his chest against the earth. His arm twisted unnaturally, wrenched from its socket, while the cross pressed into his neck and shoulders, rendering him partially paralyzed. With callous indifference, soldiers yanked him up by his dislocated arm, compelling him to continue the agonizing march. Bent over in pain, his right arm hung limp at his side, an indication of his suffering and resilience amidst unimaginable torment. Each mark told a tale of unparalleled sacrifice, each wound a testament to the depths of his love and the magnitude of his suffering. His garments, drenched in blood, were torn away without mercy, reopening wounds that had begun to cling to the fabric. Helplessly thrust upon the cross, the soldiers proceeded to hammer nails into his already twisted and dislocated right arm, causing unbearable agony as nerves and ligaments were torn apart. In the final moments on the cross, Jesus endured agony as his body bore the weight of his sacrifice. Nails pierced his hands and feet, binding him to the wooden beams. Each breath was a struggle, the weight of his body making it difficult to fill his lungs. With every heartbeat, pain radiated from the wounds inflicted upon him. His parched lips whispered prayers mingled with cries of anguish as the hours passed. His strength waned, and the pain intensified. Every movement sent waves of torment through his body. The weight of the sins of humanity pressed down upon him, a burden he willingly bore. Amid his suffering, Jesus cried out a raw and anguished plea that echoed through the heavens. It was a cry of pain and longing, and in that moment, as he surrendered to death. After Jesus' passing, Joseph of Arimathea made a courageous move, teaming up with Nicodemus, another individual who secretly admired Jesus. Joseph approached the Roman governor Pilate to request permission to take care of Jesus' body according to Jewish customs. With Pilate's approval secured, Joseph and Nicodemus meticulously wrapped Jesus' body in linen strips infused with myrrh and aloe. Time was of the essence as they worked tirelessly on the eve of the Sabbath, the day before the Jewish Sabbath rest began. Racing against time, Joseph and Nicodemus hurriedly laid Jesus in a tomb Joseph bought, situated in a nearby garden close to the site of the crucifixion, as recounted in the Gospel of John. Simon Peter later entered the tomb after Jesus' resurrection and discovered the shroud along with the napkin that had covered Jesus' head. Interestingly, the napkin remained separate from the shroud, providing a touching detail in the narrative of Jesus' burial and resurrection. Chapter 4. Shroud's Age. Controversy unveiled. In the 1980s, when the Vatican took control of the shroud and initiated a series of tests to unravel its mysteries regarding its composition, origin, and age, among these tests was carbon-14 dating conducted at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Remarkably, all three tests, with a 95% confidence level, concluded that the fabric originated between 1260 and 1390 AD, placing the shroud's creation over 1,000 years after Jesus Christ's death. To strengthen their findings, researchers highlighted that the radiocarbon dating aligns closely with historical records of the shroud's first documented appearance in 1353, attributed to Geoffrey de Charny, who purportedly brought the artifact to Lirae. Many scholars have raised doubts about the accuracy of the carbon dating conducted on the Shroud of Turin. One prominent chemist, Raymond Rogers, highlighted significant discrepancies in the results. He discovered that while the edges of the shroud contained 37% vanillin, an organic compound expected to break down over time, the body of the shroud contains 0% vanillin. This absence of vanillin in the main part of the shroud suggests that it could be much older than the carbon dating indicates. The core issue with the carbon dating lies in the samples taken for analysis. When the Vatican distributed portions of the shroud to 3 universities for carbon dating, they selected tiny clippings from the corners. Rogers argued that if samples were taken from the center of the shroud, the dating would likely reveal an older age than what was officially reported. Moreover, Rogers pointed out that the inability to detect vanillin in the lignin of the shroud fibers, as seen in other ancient linens like those from the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggests an older age for the shroud. Based on the vanillin loss, Rogers estimated that the shroud could be anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 years old, further casting doubt on the accuracy of the carbon dating results. Chapter 5. Shroud's Anatomical Scrutiny Unraveled. While many researchers have praised the image on the Shroud of Turin as anatomically perfect, others argue it might be a clever forgery. In 2007, archaeologists found a crucified Roman near Venice whose heel wounds matched those on another known victim, Jehohanan, but didn't match the wounds shown on the shroud. Furthermore, no known crucifixion victims show evidence of wrist wounds, which the shroud depicts. Critics like Joe Nickel in 1983 and Gregory S. Paul in 2010 have pointed out that the proportions of the image are not realistic. Paul argued that the face and body proportions on the shroud are impossible for a real person. He noted that the forehead is too small, the arms are unnaturally long and uneven in length, and the distance from the eyebrows to the top of the head is incorrect. These features, they suggested, are more consistent with the work of a Gothic artist than with a real human body. In 2018, researchers conducted an experimental blood stain pattern analysis, BPA, to understand how blood flows from the wounds of a crucified person and to compare these patterns to those on the Shroud of Turin. Their findings were quite revealing. They discovered that the blood patterns on the forearms and the back of the hand did not match up, indicating that these blood flows must have happened at different times due to a specific sequence of movements. Furthermore, the blood rivulets on the front of the image did not align with the lines on the lower back, even considering multiple bleeding events at different times. These inconsistencies suggest that the blood stains on the shroud are not what one would expect from a genuine burial cloth. Instead, they point to the likelihood that the shroud is an artistic or instructional representation rather than an authentic relic. The mismatched blood patterns imply that the image was carefully created to convey a certain narrative rather than naturally formed by the wounds of a crucified body. Raymond E. Brown also observed that a body in the relaxed position depicted on the shroud couldn't naturally position its hands to cover its genitals as shown. It appears that the right arm and hand were elongated to make this possible. This combination of anatomical inconsistencies leads some experts to believe that the shroud may not be the genuine burial cloth of a crucified person but rather an artistic creation from the Gothic period. Luigi Garelli, a professor of organic chemistry at the University of Pavia, claimed he recreated a full-sized version of the Shroud of Turin using only techniques available in medieval times. He started by laying a linen sheet over a volunteer and rubbing it with an acidic pigment. After this, he aged the shroud in an oven and then washed it to remove the pigment. To further mimic the original, he added blood stains, scorches, and water stains. Professor Giulio Fanti remarked that Garelli's method seemed unable to produce an image with the most critical characteristics of the Turin shroud. Nonetheless, Garelli's reproduction was featured in a National Geographic documentary. His technique included using a bas-relief method for the face, resulting in an image that looked similar to the Turin shroud but lacked the original's uniformity and intricate details. Scientists Emily Craig and Randall Bray have explored how medieval artists might have created the Shroud of Turin by using a dust transfer technique. They started by drawing a face resembling Jesus on a piece of newsprint using carbon dust mixed with collagen, mimicking the materials and methods available in the 13th and 14th centuries. Once the drawing was complete, they placed it on a table and covered it with a piece of linen. To transfer the image, they pressed the linen firmly against the newsprint using the flat side of a wooden spoon. This process resulted in a reddish-brown image on the linen that looked remarkably lifelike. The image had a three-dimensional quality and showed no signs of brush strokes, making it appear as if it could have been a genuine imprint of a person. Their experiment demonstrated that it was possible to create a convincing and detailed likeness using techniques that would have been accessible in medieval times. Chapter 6. Shroud's DNA, Global Footprints. In 2011, a team led by Salvatore LaRusso from the University of Bologna conducted a fascinating study on the Shroud of Turin. They used advanced digital image processing on 2 photographs of the shroud, including a famous negative taken by Giuseppe Enri in 1931. Despite their thorough analysis, they didn't find any images of flowers, coins, or other objects on the shroud. Fast forward to 2015, when another intriguing study emerged. This time, Italian researcher Barcaccia and his team published their findings in scientific reports. They investigated DNA samples collected from the shroud and its backing cloth during vacuuming sessions in 1977 and 1988. Their research revealed traces of DNA from 19 different types of plants. These plants hailed from diverse regions, including the Mediterranean, Central Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Asia, and the Americas. The study didn't stop at plant DNA. They also discovered human mitochondrial DNA sequences. These sequences corresponded to various ethnic groups and geographic regions, such as Europe, North and East Africa, the Middle East, and India. Additionally, they found DNA from non-human sources, including various birds and even a marine worm typically found in the northern Pacific Ocean near Canada. These findings provided a global snapshot of the diverse biological materials that had come into contact with the shroud over the centuries, adding another layer of mystery to its already puzzling history. After carefully analyzing the DNA of pollen and dust collected from the Shroud of Turin, researchers made an exciting discovery. The DNA showed that many different people from various parts of the world had come into contact with the shroud over the centuries. The scientists explained that this diverse mix of DNA doesn't rule out the possibility that the shroud originated in medieval Europe. In fact, it aligns well with the historical journey the shroud is believed to have taken, possibly starting in the Near East. What's even more fascinating is that the results hint at an intriguing possibility. The linen cloth might have been made in India. This new information adds another layer to the shroud's storied past, suggesting that its origins and travels were even more complex and far-reaching than previously thought. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. In the dark chamber of a museum, a group of scholars huddled around a glass case containing the mysterious artifact, the Shroud of Turin. Its delicate fabric whispered tales of centuries past, capturing the imagination of all who beheld it. Dr. Sofia Alvarez, a renowned historian and skeptic, eyed the relic with a mixture of curiosity and doubt as she examined the intricate patterns woven into the cloth. A revelation dawned upon her. The fabric held secrets that could potentially unravel the very fabric of history. With trembling hands, she peeled back the layers of mystery, revealing a shocking truth hidden for millennia. The Shroud of Turin, it seemed, was not merely a relic of religious significance but a witness to the life and death of a man who had changed the course of history, Jesus Christ. Embedded within the fibers were microscopic traces of pollen, DNA fragments, and faint imprints that matched the descriptions of the crucifixion wounds. In a moment of clarity, Dr. Alvarez realized the magnitude of her discovery. The title of her groundbreaking paper flashed before her eyes. The Shroud of Turin reveals shocking truth about Jesus Christ. And with that, she embarked on a journey to unveil the untold story hidden within the folds of time. Chapter 7. Shroud's Resurrection Testimony Unveiled. When exploring pieces of evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, the shroud presents three compelling arguments. Firstly, while numerous burial shrouds exist, none besides the Shroud of Turin feature an image. Most display only blood and decomposition stains. What sets the shroud apart is its unique double-body image, observable in both positive and negative forms, with indications suggesting that it was produced by a burst of light or heat. While recent experimental findings provide further support for this theory, the notion of radiation emanating from a body resembling Jesus holds significant implications for the resurrection, particularly when considered alongside historical accounts. Secondly, scientific analysis reveals a lack of decomposition on the shroud, suggesting that the body did not remain in the cloth for an extended period, even in the Middle Eastern climate. The absence of decomposition adds another layer of intrigue to the mystery surrounding the shroud's origin and authenticity. However, skeptics may raise objections, suggesting various reasons why a body might have been unwrapped from a burial cloth. This is where the third piece of evidence becomes particularly compelling. Pathologists examining the shroud found no evidence of unwrapping. Instead, the cloth made direct contact with the body, with blood stains transferred directly onto it, becoming partially attached. The intact blood clots visible in almost every wound, along with the undisturbed borders of these stains, indicate that the body remained undisturbed within the shroud, further reinforcing its potential authenticity. These points hold considerable weight individually, but when considered together, they form a compelling body of evidence. Firstly, the absence of decomposition on the shroud suggests that the man buried within it did not remain there for an extended period. However, intriguingly, there are no signs of the body being removed or unwrapped, as evidenced by the intact blood clots and undisturbed borders of the stains. Moreover, the potential burst of radiation from the deceased body adds a captivating dimension to the mystery. What enhances the excitement further is that all this evidence is empirical and scientifically verifiable, making it even more compelling. Notably, the evidence provided by the shroud aligns harmoniously with the robust historical evidence supporting Jesus' resurrection. In fact, the evidence from the shroud is so substantial that its absence as Jesus' burial garment would present a significant challenge, as it would raise questions about who else might have seemingly risen from the dead. Chapter 8. Shroud's alignment with Gospels. One of the most common concerns among those who study the Shroud of Turin from a religious perspective is whether it matches the descriptions of Jesus' burial in the New Testament. If there are discrepancies between the two, then the shroud cannot truly be the burial cloth of Jesus. According to theologians, the New Testament gives us some details about Jesus' burial, although it doesn't go into exact specifics. One aspect that's often questioned when comparing the New Testament accounts with the shroud is the napkin, which is hardly ever talked about. Some argue that the napkin should have the image instead of the main burial cloth because it was laid flat over the face. However, research into ancient Jewish customs shows that the napkin was actually folded up and tied around the head to keep the jaw closed during rigor mortis. This practice is supported by both Jewish writings and the New Testament. Interestingly, the man depicted on the shroud also had a cloth tied around his jaw, which aligns with these ancient customs. This isn't a contradiction, but rather a confirmation of the methods depicted on the shroud. Another issue raised is that the man on the shroud wasn't washed before burial, which was a common Jewish custom. While none of the Gospels explicitly state that Jesus' body was washed, it's assumed because of Jewish burial traditions. However, the Code of Jewish Law mentions exceptions to the washing custom, such as when a person is killed by the government. This sheds some light on the matter and suggests that there may have been exceptions to the washing custom, even in Jesus' case. In such cases, according to ancient laws, leaving blood on a person's body was a form of punishment for crimes against the state. So, if Jesus was buried according to Jewish customs, as mentioned in the Bible, it's likely he wasn't washed. Some wonder about the type of linen Jesus was buried in. Some think he was wrapped up like an Egyptian mummy, but the term used in the Bible means wrapped or folded, leaving room for interpretation. Interestingly, ancient Jewish examples show similar burial practices to what's depicted on the shroud. For example, in an Essene cemetery, some people were buried like the man on the shroud. The Code of Jewish Law also says that someone killed should be buried in a single plain sheet of linen. Even Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, was bound around his head, wrists, and ankles, similar to the man on the shroud. There's also a question about whether Jesus was buried in one or more strips of linen. Some Bible passages mention grave clothes in both the singular and the plural. However, scientific testing shows that the man on the shroud was buried in at least 4 strips of linen, including the shroud itself, a napkin around the head, and his wrists and ankles tied together. These issues are the main ones when comparing the shroud to the New Testament. An exegetically study of relevant Bible passages doesn't prove the shroud is fake. On the contrary, it aligns with the data and even supports the burial method depicted on the shroud. Burial practices like those depicted on the shroud were apparently practiced by Jews in Jesus' time, according to various sources. So, whether the shroud is authentic or not must be determined through scientific and historical investigation. Comparing the gospel accounts of Jesus' suffering with the description of the man on the shroud unveils remarkable similarities. The man buried in the shroud bore numerous injuries, including cuts to the scalp, bruises on the face, and over 120 wounds after being beaten. He carried a heavy object on his shoulders, leaving marks on his shoulder blades. He stumbled and fell, resulting in bruises on his knees. Most significantly, he displayed 5 major wounds associated with crucifixion: puncture wounds in both wrists and feet, and a pierce in the right side of the chest from which blood mixed with watery liquid flowed. Pathologists noted that the man was in rigor mortis, with wounds distinguishable as pre- or post-mortem. The resemblance between Jesus' ordeal as described in the Gospels and the wounds on the shroud is striking. Even more intriguing is the occurrence of uncommon events shared by Jesus and the man on the shroud. For instance, both had a crown of thorns placed on their heads and endured severe beatings. While crucifixion victims typically had their legs broken to hasten death, neither Jesus nor the man on the shroud had their ankles broken. Instead, they were stabbed in the chest post-mortem. They were buried individually, wrapped in expensive linen, and interred hastily. Considering the unique similarities between Jesus and the man on the shroud, Scholars have concluded that it's highly improbable for two different individuals to undergo such identical crucifixion experiences. Some studies suggest a 1 in 225 billion chance that they are different persons. Even the most skeptical calculations still yield incredibly low probabilities that Jesus and the man on the shroud are not the same. Moreover, there are no contradictions between their experiences, further bolstering the likelihood of their identity being the same. Throughout the centuries, the Shroud of Turin has been revered as the genuine burial cloth of Jesus, passed down as a sacred relic. Unlike recently discovered artifacts that merely remind us of Jesus, the shroud has always been regarded as the real deal long before modern science could scrutinize it. This enduring belief strengthens the connection between Jesus and the figure depicted on the shroud. While we can't definitively identify the man buried in the shroud, there are compelling reasons to believe it could indeed be Jesus's actual burial garment. Numerous subtle points align without any contradictions, further supported by the scientific consensus that the artifact is authentic, not a forgery.